The smell of frying bacon woke Sarah Logan before dawn, and he lay there in his second-story bedroom, wondering who in blazes was cooking in his kitchen at this ungodly hour. He threw off the blankets and pulled on his trousers, not bothering with a shirt as he padded barefoot down the stairs of his ranch house in Wheatland, Wyoming, a town that had grown up around the railroad in the 1870s, and now, in 1884, served as a modest hub for cattle ranchers like himself. The kitchen glowed with lamplight, and there she stood, a woman he had never seen before, her ample figure moving with surprising grace as she flipped bacon in his cast-iron skillet. She wore a simple black dress that marked her as a widow, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, and even from behind he could see the determination in the set of her shoulders as she worked. She hummed something low and sweet, a tune he did not recognize, and seemed completely unaware of his presence in the doorway. Sarah cleared his throat, and the woman jumped, spinning around with the spatula raised like a weapon. Her face flushed pink, and he noticed she had kind eyes, the color of honey in the lamplight, set in a round face that showed the marks of both laughter and sorrow. "Who are you?" he asked, keeping his voice level despite his confusion. "Winifred Carter," she said, lowering the spatula. Her voice had a slight tremor, but also a firmness underneath. "Your foreman, Mr. Patterson, he hired me yesterday evening. Said you needed someone to cook for the hands. Said you were gone to Cheyenne and would not be back until next week." Sarah sighed and ran a hand through his dark hair, suddenly aware he was standing there half-dressed. "Patterson hired you without my say-so. He said he had your permission, sir." Her chin lifted slightly. "If that was a lie, I apologize for the intrusion. I can pack my things and be gone within the hour. But breakfast is nearly ready, and it would be a shame to waste good food." Something in her directness appealed to him. Patterson had been after him for months to hire a cook, complaining that the men were tired of their own terrible attempts at food and that it was affecting morale. Sarah had resisted, not wanting a stranger in his house, but he had to admit the bacon smelled better than anything he or his men had produced in recent memory. "Finish cooking," he said. "We will talk after." She nodded and turned back to the stove, and he noticed the way her hands shook slightly as she picked up the spatula again. He retreated upstairs to make himself presentable, wondering what had possessed Patterson to hire a woman without consulting him first, and wondering even more why he found himself reluctant to send her away. When he came back down, dressed properly this time, she had set the table with plates of bacon, eggs, and fresh biscuits that must have required her to wake well before dawn to prepare. The coffee smelled rich and strong, the way he liked it. "Where are you from, Mrs. Carter?" he asked as he sat down, gesturing for her to join him. She hesitated, then took a seat across from him, her hands folded in her lap. "Kansas originally. My husband and I had a small farm near Lawrence. He passed 2 years ago. Fever took him quick. I am sorry for your loss. Thank you." She looked down at her hands. "I tried to keep the farm going, but I could not manage it alone. The bank took it 6 months ago. I have been working where I could since then, moving from town to town. Mr. Patterson found me at the boarding house. I was asking about work." "Can you cook for 20 men?" Sarah asked, testing her. "I can cook for 50 if need be," she replied, meeting his eyes. "I worked in a hotel kitchen in Topeka for a spell. I know how to manage large meals." He bit into a biscuit and it practically melted in his mouth. The woman could cook, that much was certain. The hands eat at sunrise and sunset. You would need to prepare both meals, plus keep coffee going during the day. It is hard work. "I am not afraid of hard work, Mr. Logan. The pay is $20 a month plus room and board. You would have the small room off the kitchen. It is not much, but it is private and has a good stove for heat in winter." Her eyes widened slightly. "That is generous. Good help is worth good pay," he said. "But I need to know you will stay. I cannot have you running off after a week or two. These men depend on regular meals, especially during calving season and roundup." "I will stay as long as you will have me," Winifred said quietly. "I have nowhere else to go, Mr. Logan. This is a blessing I did not expect." Something twisted in his chest at the vulnerability in her voice. He knew what it was to lose everything and have to start over. He had built this ranch from nothing after the war, spending years breaking his back to turn a struggling piece of land into something prosperous. He understood desperation and the fierce need to prove yourself. "Then welcome to the Rocking L Ranch, Mrs. Carter. Go ring the bell for breakfast. The men will be eager to meet you." She rose quickly, relief washing over her features, and hurried outside to ring the iron bell that hung beside the kitchen door. Within minutes, Sarah heard the thunder of boots on the porch as 20 hungry ranch hands descended on the house, their usual morning grumbling silenced by surprise when they saw a woman serving breakfast. Sarah watched from his seat as Winifred moved efficiently among them, filling plates and cups, answering questions about where she was from and how long she was staying. The men were respectful, made so by both the quality of the food and the quiet dignity she carried despite her obvious nervousness. She smiled at their compliments and laughed at their jokes, but kept a professional distance that Sarah appreciated. Patterson, his foreman, was a grizzled man in his 50s with a weathered face and shrewd eyes. He caught Sarah's gaze across the room and nodded slightly, a gesture that said clearer than words that he knew he had overstepped, but hoped Sarah would forgive it. Sarah gave a slight nod in return. He would have words with Patterson later about consulting him before making decisions, but he could not fault the man's judgment in this instance. The days fell into a rhythm after that. Winifred woke before dawn to prepare breakfast, spent the morning cleaning the kitchen and preparing for the evening meal, and had dinner ready precisely when the men came in from their work. She kept to herself mostly, staying in her small room when she was not working, and Sarah found himself increasingly aware of her presence in his house. He took to lingering over his morning coffee, reading the newspaper from Cheyenne a week late, but really listening to the sound of her humming as she kneaded bread or stirred stew. She had a pleasant voice, low and melodic, and seemed to know endless old songs that she sang under her breath while she worked. Sometimes he would glance up from his paper and catch himself watching the way lamplight caught in her dark hair, or the way her face softened when she smiled at something one of the younger ranch hands said. He told himself it was simple appreciation for good help. She was efficient and reliable, qualities he valued highly. The men were happier, that was undeniable. They worked harder and complained less, bolstered by regular good meals and the motherly warmth Winifred brought to the place. That was worth any awkward feelings her presence stirred in him. But late at night, lying alone in his bed upstairs, he could not quite convince himself that was all it was. 3 weeks after Winifred's arrival, a spring storm rolled across the Wyoming plains, bringing driving rain and wind that rattled the windows. Sarah had been out checking on the cattle in the far pastures and rode back soaked to the skin, shivering despite his heavy coat. He left his horse in the barn and ran for the house, boots squelching in the mud. Winifred met him at the door with a towel. "Lord have mercy, you are drenched. Get those wet things off before you catch your death." She bustled him into the kitchen, throwing more wood on the fire in the stove, and disappeared into her room. She returned with a quilt and draped it over his shoulders once he had stripped off his soaked shirt and coat. Her hands lingered for just a moment on his shoulders, warm through the fabric, and he felt that touch all the way to his bones. "I will heat water for a bath," she said briskly, "and make you something hot to drink." "You do not have to fuss," he protested, but she was already pulling out pots and filling them with water from the pump. "A man who works as hard as you need someone to fuss over him now and then," she replied. "Sit by the fire and do not argue with me." He found himself obeying, too cold and tired to protest further. She moved around the kitchen with purpose, and soon had hot coffee in his hands and water heating for a bath. The storm howled outside, but the kitchen felt warm and safe, filled with the smell of coffee and bread and the quiet efficiency of her care. "Why have you never remarried?" he asked suddenly, surprising himself with the question. She paused in her work, then continued stirring something on the stove. "I suppose I have not met anyone who made me want to try again. My marriage was good, but it was also hard. My husband was a kind man but a dreamer, always chasing the next opportunity, never satisfied with what we had. When he died, I grieved, but I also felt a strange relief that I could finally stop moving, stop starting over. I wanted stability. I still want that." "And what if stability becomes loneliness?" he asked quietly. She turned to look at him, her honey-colored eyes thoughtful. "What if it does?" "Loneliness is safer than heartbreak, is it not?" "I do not know if that is true," he said. "I think perhaps they hurt the same, just differently." They looked at each other across the warm kitchen, and something shifted in the air between them, something fragile and new that neither seemed ready to name. Winifred broke the gaze first, turning back to her work with pink cheeks. "Your bath water is nearly ready," she said softly. "I will leave you to it." She retreated to her room, and Sarah sat by the fire long after she had gone, thinking about loneliness and heartbreak and the way her hands had felt on his shoulders. As spring turned toward summer, Sarah found himself inventing reasons to be in the house during the day. He would come in to check on supplies, to review his account books at the kitchen table, to discuss the next day's work schedule with Patterson over coffee. Always, he was aware of Winifred working quietly nearby, and increasingly aware that she seemed to know exactly what he was doing. She never called him on it directly, but sometimes he would catch a knowing glint in her eye, or a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth, as he invented yet another excuse to linger over breakfast. The ranch hands noticed too, exchanging grins when Sarah suddenly developed a need to discuss minor details that had never required his attention before. Patterson was the only one brave enough to comment. "She is a good woman," he said one evening as they stood outside the barn, ostensibly checking on a horse with a slight limp. "Steady and kind, the sort of woman who makes a house into a home." "I am aware," Sarah replied shortly. "And you are a good man who has been alone too long," Patterson continued, undeterred. "Seems to me you are both dancing around something that could be simple if you would just let it. She works for me. It would not be appropriate. Then stop having her work for you. Court her proper. She could hire on as cook without living in your house. Or you could marry her and then it would not matter either way." Sarah shot him a look. "You are overstepping, Patterson." "Maybe so," the older man agreed, "but someone needs to. You are not getting any younger, boss, and happiness does not knock on your door twice if you ignore it the first time." The conversation stayed with Sarah as he went about his work. He thought about it while checking fence lines, while helping with the branding, while doing the 100 other tasks that filled his days. Patterson was right that he was lonely, and right that Winifred seemed to fill a space in his life he had not realized was empty. But the complication seemed insurmountable. She was his employee. She was still grieving her husband. She had made it clear she wanted stability, not romantic entanglement. And there was the matter of her size. which he knew society judged harshly, though he found her beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional standards. He was still wrestling with these thoughts when Tom Bradley rode up to the ranch house one afternoon in mid-June, his horse lathered with sweat. Bradley owned the neighboring spread and was generally a decent fellow, though given to dramatic pronouncements. "Logan, you need to watch your new cook," Bradley said without preamble, swinging down from his horse. "There is talk in town." Sarah felt his jaw tighten. "What kind of talk?" "The usual nonsense. Some of the women at the church are saying it is not proper for her to be living in your house, that it gives the wrong impression. And there are some men saying worse things, suggesting she is something other than what she is." Bradley looked uncomfortable. "I am not saying I believe any of it. I am just warning you that people are talking." "Let them talk," Sarah said coldly. "Mrs. Carter is my employee and her living situation is none of their concern." "I agree with you, but you know how small towns are. The talk could damage her reputation and yours too. You might want to think about how to handle it before it gets worse." After Bradley left, Sarah stood on the porch, fury burning in his chest. He hated small-minded gossip, hated the way people judged others for petty reasons. Winifred had done nothing wrong. She worked hard, kept to herself, and treated everyone with respect. That she lived in a room off his kitchen was pure practicality, not impropriety. But he knew how these things worked. Once gossip started, it spread like wildfire, and the truth mattered less than the story people wanted to tell. He found Winifred in the kitchen, rolling out pie crust with efficient movements. "We need to talk," he said. She looked up, immediately sensing his mood. "What is wrong?" He told her about Bradley's warning, watching her face grow pale as he spoke. When he finished, she set down her rolling pin and wiped her hands on her apron, her movements slow and deliberate. "I will leave," she said quietly. "I do not want to cause trouble for you." "No," he said sharply. "You will not leave because of small-minded gossip. You have done nothing wrong. But if people are talking, let them talk. I do not care what they say." "You should care," she said, her voice rising slightly. "Your reputation matters in this community. You do business with these people. And she paused, swallowing hard. "I know what people say about women like me. I am too fat, too plain, too much. Of course they would think the worst." The pain in her voice cut him deeper than any insult aimed at him. He crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and took her hands in his, forcing her to look at him. "You listen to me, Winifred Carter. You are not too much of anything. You are strong and capable and kind, and anyone who cannot see that is a fool. I do not care what the town gossips say, and neither should you." She stared at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Why are you being so kind to me?" "Because you deserve kindness," he said. "And because—" He stopped, realizing he was about to say something that would change everything between them. But looking at her face, at the vulnerability and hope warring in her expression, he found he could not stop himself. "Because I have feelings for you, more than employer to employee, more than I should, probably. And the thought of you leaving, of losing you because of gossip, is unbearable to me." Her breath caught. "Sarah, I know it is complicated. I know you work for me, and you may not feel the same way, and there are a dozen reasons this is a terrible idea. But I am tired of pretending I come into this kitchen just to check on supplies. I come in because I want to see you. I want to hear you humming while you cook. I want to make you smile. And if that makes me a foolish man, then so be it." She stood very still, looking down at their joined hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I feel the same way. I have for weeks now. But I was afraid to hope that someone like you could want someone like me." "Someone like me?" he asked, bewildered. "Winifred, I am just a rancher. You could have any man you wanted." She laughed, a sound caught between joy and sadness. You do not see what others see when they look at me. You see past it somehow. I see you, he said firmly. I see a woman who wakes before dawn to feed 20 hungry men, who sings while she works because she finds joy even in hard tasks, who treats my youngest, most awkward ranch hands with the same kindness she shows everyone else, who is brave enough to start over alone in a strange town. That is what I see. The tears spilled over then, tracking down her round cheeks, and he reached up to brush them away gently. Do not cry. I am crying because I am happy, she said, laughing through the tears. Because for the first time in 2 years, I feel like maybe everything will be all right. He pulled her close then, wrapping his arms around her solid warmth, and felt something in his chest unlock. She fit against him perfectly, her head tucking just under his chin, and he marveled at how right it felt to hold her. They stood like that for a long moment, the pie crust forgotten on the table, the kitchen filled with nothing but the sound of their breathing and the ticking of the clock on the mantel. Finally, she pulled back slightly, looking up at him with eyes that held both hope and caution. What do we do now? She asked. Now, he said, I court you properly. I call on you officially, take you to church socials, make it clear to everyone in Wheatland that my intentions are honorable, and when enough time has passed that it is respectable, I ask you to marry me. If that is what you want. Is that what you want? She asked softly. More than anything I have wanted in a very long time, he admitted. She smiled then, a real smile that lit up her whole face. Then yes, Sarah Logan, I would very much like for you to court me. They agreed she should move into the boarding house in town to quiet the gossip, though Sarah hated the idea of her leaving his ranch. He increased her wages to cover the boarding house costs, and she continued to come out each day to cook for the hands. But now, when he lingered over breakfast, everyone knew why, and the ranch hands made themselves scarce to give them privacy. True to his word, Sarah courted her properly. He took her to the 4th of July social in Wheatland, where they ate watermelon and watched fireworks explode over the prairie. He sat with her at church services, ignoring the stares and whispers, his hand steady on her elbow as they walked in together. He brought her small gifts, a book of poetry, a pretty handkerchief, a cameo brooch that had belonged to his mother. Some in town embraced the courtship, happy to see Sarah finally settling down. Others whispered and judged, but Sarah found he truly did not care. The only opinion that mattered to him was Winifred's, and she bloomed under his attention like a flower given water after a drought. In August, they had their first real argument. Sarah wanted to take her to the theater in Cheyenne, a 2-day trip that would require them to stay overnight at a hotel. Winifred refused, worried about how it would look. I have worked so hard to build a respectable reputation here, she said, her voice tight with frustration. If we travel together overnight, unmarried, it will undo everything. Then we will bring a chaperone, he said, or we will marry before we go. I do not care which, but I am tired of letting other people's opinions dictate how we live. You do not understand what it is like to be judged constantly, she shot back. To have people look at you and make assumptions based on how you look, what you are. I cannot afford the same carelessness you can. The words hit him like a physical blow. You think I am careless, that I do not take your reputation seriously. I think you are a man who has always had power in this community, and you do not fully understand what it is like to not have that, she said, her voice gentler now. I am not trying to hurt you. I am trying to protect us both. They stood on opposite sides of his kitchen, the space between them feeling suddenly vast. Finally, Sarah sighed and ran a hand through his hair. You are right. I have not thought about it from your perspective. I am sorry. She crossed the space between them and took his hand. "I know you want to shout to the world that you love me, and I love you for it. But can we be patient just a little longer? Can we do this the slow, respectable way so that when we do marry, no one can say anything against us?" "How much longer?" he asked. "December," she said. "A winter wedding. That will be almost 6 months of proper courtship. No one could criticize that." It felt like an eternity, but he agreed. And so they waited, stealing moments when they could, building a foundation of friendship and trust alongside their growing love. Sarah learned that Winifred loved thunderstorms and hated spiders, that she read voraciously, and had a gift for mathematics. Winifred learned that Sarah had fought in the Civil War and still had nightmares sometimes, that he wanted children but had given up hope of having them, that his gruff exterior hid a romantic heart. September brought the fall roundup, a busy time when every hand was needed from dawn until well past dark. Winifred moved back to the ranch temporarily to feed the crew, and Sarah treasured the long evenings when everyone else had gone to bed, and they could sit together by the kitchen fire, too tired for much talk but content in each other's presence. One such night, as they sat in comfortable silence, Winifred said quietly, "I want you to know something about my first marriage." Sarah looked over at her, seeing tension in the set of her shoulders. "You do not have to tell me anything you do not want to." "I want to," she said. "I want there to be honesty between us." She took a breath. "My husband was kind, but our marriage was not passionate. We were friends who got married because it was practical. We never had children, though we tried for years. I always thought it was my fault, that my body was wrong somehow. And when he died, part of me felt guilty for feeling relieved that I would not have to keep trying and failing." "Winifred, let me finish," she said gently. "I am telling you this because what I feel for you is different. It is not practical or sensible. It is consuming and terrifying and wonderful, and I want children with you, but if that does not happen, I need you to know it will not diminish what we have. You are enough. We are enough." He pulled her close, feeling the dampness of tears on his shirt. "Thank you for telling me. And for what it is worth, whatever happens, you are enough for me too." October brought the first snow, dusting the prairie white and signaling the beginning of winter's approach. Sarah and Winifred began making plans for the wedding, keeping it simple given her status as a widow. They would marry in the small church in Wheatland, with just the ranch hands and a few friends in attendance. Winifred would wear a blue dress instead of white, and they would have a small dinner at the ranch afterward. But first, Sarah needed to do something he had been planning for weeks. On a crisp Sunday afternoon, he saddled 2 horses and asked Winifred to ride out with him. She had grown up on a farm and was a capable rider, despite her claims that she was too heavy for most horses. Sarah had purchased a sturdy mare specifically for her, a gentle creature named Daisy who did not spook easily. He led them to the top of a ridge that overlooked his entire spread. Below, cattle dotted the golden prairie, and smoke rose from the chimney of the ranch house. The mountains stood blue and distant on the horizon, and the sky arched overhead in that particular shade of endless blue that only Wyoming could produce. "It is beautiful," Winifred said, her breath visible in the cold air. "This is what I wanted to show you," Sarah said. "Everything you see here I built with my own hands. After the war, I had nothing. I was angry and lost and did not know who I was anymore. I came west because I needed space to figure it out. I bought this land for almost nothing because no one else wanted it, and I spent years breaking my back to make it into something." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I am telling you this because I want you to understand that I know what it is like to be looked down on, to have people assume you will fail. And I know what it is like to prove them wrong through sheer stubbornness. You and I, we are both survivors. We have both lost things and rebuilt. And I think that makes us stronger together than we ever could be apart." He dropped to one knee in the prairie grass, pulling out a small box from his coat pocket. "I know we agreed to wait until December to marry, and we will. But I wanted to do this right, in a place that matters to me, with no one watching but the sky and the prairie. Winifred Carter, will you marry me? Will you help me build not just a ranch, but a home? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to make you as happy as you have made me?" She was crying again, but smiling through the tears. "Yes, Sarah Logan. Yes to all of it." He slipped the ring on her finger, a simple gold band with a small sapphire that matched the color of her eyes in certain lights. Then he stood and kissed her properly for the first time. There on the ridge with the wind whipping around them and the whole wide prairie spreading out below. She kissed him back with a passion that surprised and delighted him, her hands fisting in his coat, and he thought he had never felt so perfectly, completely alive. The weeks until the wedding passed in a blur of preparation. Winifred sewed her blue dress with help from a few of the friendlier women in town, slowly winning over even those who had been skeptical of her at first. Sarah discovered that having a wedding to plan made him the subject of endless teasing from his ranch hands, who took great delight in offering unsolicited advice about married life. "Just agree with everything she says," advised old Patterson. "It is the secret to a happy marriage." "Bring her flowers for no reason," suggested Tommy, the youngest hand. "Women like that sort of thing." "Do not try to understand her moods," offered Jake, who had been married 3 times. "Just accept that she will have them and love her anyway." Sarah took it all in good humor, mostly because he was too happy to care about being teased. He threw himself into preparing for Winifred's arrival as a permanent resident of the ranch house, expanding her small room into a proper suite and adding touches he hoped she would like. A comfortable chair for reading, better lamps, a larger wardrobe. When she saw what he had done, she turned to him with shining eyes. "You did not have to do all this. I wanted to," he said simply. "I want you to feel like this is your home, not just mine." The wedding took place on a cold December morning, the air crisp and clear. Winifred wore her blue dress and looked more beautiful than Sarah had ever seen her, her dark hair arranged in soft curls and her cheeks pink with cold and emotion. They spoke their vows in voices that did not waver, promising to love and honor each other through whatever life brought. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Sarah kissed her tenderly, aware of the watching crowd but caring only about the woman in his arms. She was his now, officially and forever, and the rightness of it settled into his bones like a benediction. The dinner at the ranch was boisterous and joyful, with the ranch hands putting on a spread that included dishes from everyone's backgrounds. There was music and dancing, and Sarah waltzed with his new wife in the cleared space of the barn, the lantern light making everything feel magical. She laughed as he spun her, her blue dress swirling, and he thought he had never heard a more beautiful sound. When the guests finally left and they were alone in the ranch house, the reality of being married suddenly felt overwhelming. They stood in the kitchen, suddenly awkward with each other until Winifred started to laugh. "We are being ridiculous," she said. "We have spent months talking about everything under the sun, and now we are nervous." "I want everything to be perfect for you," Sarah admitted. She crossed to him and took his hands. "It already is perfect. You are here, I am here, and we have the rest of our lives to figure out everything else." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and carried her up the stairs to the bedroom he had prepared for them. What happened next was private and tender, and more wonderful than either of them had dared hope, a physical expression of the love they had been building for months. The winter passed in a cocoon of happiness. Winifred thrived as the lady of the ranch, bringing warmth and efficiency to every aspect of running the household. She continued to cook for the hands but now also managed the household accounts, organized the social obligations, and generally made everything run more smoothly than Sarah had ever managed alone. More importantly, she made the house feel like a home. There were flowers on the table even in winter, books on every surface, the smell of baking bread on cold afternoons. She sang while she worked, filled the rooms with laughter, and loved Sarah with a generosity that still took his breath away. In return, he cherished her. He brought her small gifts from trips to town, rubbed her feet when she had been on them all day, sat with her in the evenings reading aloud from the newspaper or poetry. They talked about everything and nothing, built traditions and inside jokes, learned each other's bodies and hearts with patient attention. In March, Winifred suspected she might be pregnant. She waited until she was sure before telling Sarah, worried about disappointing him if she was wrong. But when her monthly time did not come for the third month in a row and morning sickness confirmed what she hoped, she could not keep the secret any longer. She told him at breakfast, simple and direct. "I am going to have a baby." Sarah went very still, his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor. But yes, I am certain." He set down the cup very carefully, and she watched emotions chase across his face: shock, joy, fear, wonder. Then he was out of his chair and lifting her up, spinning her around the kitchen while she shrieked with laughter. "We are going to have a baby," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Winifred, we are going to have a baby." "Put me down before you drop me," she said, still laughing. He set her down gently, then immediately dropped to his knees and pressed his ear to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. This is your father. I am very pleased to meet you." Winifred ran her fingers through his hair, tears streaming down her face. "I was afraid. After years of trying with my first husband and nothing happening, I thought maybe I could not." "Maybe you just needed the right man," he said, grinning up at her. Then his face grew serious. "Or maybe it was just timing. Either way, this baby is a gift." The pregnancy was not easy. Winifred was sick for months, struggling to keep food down and losing weight rather than gaining it at first. Sarah was beside himself with worry, hovering over her constantly until she threatened to throw things at him. "Women have been having babies since the dawn of time," she reminded him. "I am uncomfortable, not dying. I just want to take care of you. Then fetch me some crackers and stop looking at me like I am made of glass." He did, though it was against every instinct he had. As the sickness passed and she began to bloom with health, his worry eased somewhat. She was beautiful pregnant, her face glowing and her body rounding in ways that made his heart clench with tenderness. He could not stop touching her belly, marveling at the miracle of life growing there. The baby came in November, a year after their wedding. The birth was long and difficult, lasting through a night and into the next day. Sarah paced the downstairs like a caged animal, listening to Winifred's cries from above and feeling utterly helpless. Patterson and some of the older hands took turns trying to distract him, but nothing worked until the thin wail of a baby finally split the air. The midwife came down, smiling tiredly. "You have a son, Mr. Logan. A big, healthy boy." Sarah took the stairs 3 at a time, bursting into the bedroom where Winifred lay exhausted but beaming, a tiny bundle in her arms. He approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at his son for the first time. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was red-faced from crying, his little fists waving in the air. "He was perfect." "Samuel," Winifred said softly. "I thought we could name him Samuel after you. Samuel Logan." "Samuel," Sarah repeated, testing the name. Then he shook his head. "No, not after me." Let him be his own person. What about William, after your father? William Samuel Logan, Winifred said, smiling. It is perfect. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed and put his arm around his wife, staring down at their son. I did not think I could be this happy, he admitted. I thought my life was set, that I knew what it would be. And then you walked into my kitchen that morning and changed everything. I thought my life was over, Winifred said quietly. I thought I would spend my remaining years alone, moving from place to place, never belonging anywhere. And then you gave me a home. You gave me love. You gave me this. They sat together, a new family, as the November sun streamed through the window and their son slept peacefully in his mother's arms. Outside, the ranch continued its work, cattle lowing in the distance, horses whinnying in the barn. But inside that room, time seemed to stand still, holding them in a perfect moment of peace and completion. William was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his mother's honey-colored eyes and his father's stubborn chin. Sarah discovered that fatherhood suited him, despite his initial fears that he would not know what to do. He could calm William with a few words in his deep voice, and spent hours just watching his son sleep, marveling at the tiny perfection of his fingers and toes. Winifred bloomed in motherhood, finding a competence she had not known she possessed. She managed nursing and housework and cooking with a grace that made it all look easy, though Sarah knew better. He hired additional help for the kitchen so she could focus on William, and the ranch continued to prosper. As William grew from baby to toddler, waddling around the ranch house and charming all the hands, Sarah found himself thinking about legacy in ways he never had before. He had built this ranch for himself, as proof that he could survive and thrive despite everything. But now it was more than that. It was something to pass on, a foundation for his son and any other children they might have, and there were other children. When William was 2, Winifred gave birth to twin daughters, Grace and Catherine, who looked like miniature versions of their mother and immediately wrapped their father around their tiny fingers. The ranch house rang with laughter and crying and the constant chaos of small children, and Sarah loved every exhausting moment of it. The years passed in the way they do when life is good, slipping by almost without notice. William grew tall and strong, already showing signs of being a natural horseman. The twins were whirlwinds of energy, constantly getting into trouble and charming their way out of it again. And through it all, Sarah and Winifred loved each other with a steady constancy that only deepened with time. They had their arguments, of course. Any marriage did. They fought about money and discipline and whether to expand the ranch. They had bad days when the children were sick, or the weather destroyed crops, or they were simply too tired to be patient with each other. But beneath every argument was the bedrock certainty that they belonged together, that they had chosen each other, and would continue choosing each other every day. On their 10th anniversary, Sarah took Winifred back to the ridge where he had proposed. The children were old enough to be left with Patterson for an afternoon, and they rode out on a warm June day, the prairie blooming with wildflowers. "You remember the first time I brought you here?" Sarah asked as they stood looking out over the ranch. "I remember everything about our courtship," Winifred said, smiling. "I remember thinking you must be crazy to want someone like me. I remember feeling like I had stumbled into a fairy tale. And now, does it still feel like a fairy tale?" she laughed. "Now it feels real. Better than a fairy tale because it is ours and we built it together. Our marriage, our children, our life, all of it. I love you," he said, pulling her close. "More now than I did 10 years ago, and I did not think that was possible." "I love you too," she said, leaning into his embrace. "Thank you for seeing me that morning in your kitchen. Thank you for not sending me away." "I saw you," he said simply, "and I knew I wanted to keep seeing you every morning for the rest of my life." They stood together on the ridge as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Below, their ranch spread out like a promise kept, smoke rising from the chimney of the house that had become a home. And somewhere in that house, 3 children waited for their parents to return, secure in the love that surrounded them. Sarah thought back to that morning 10 years ago when he had woken to the smell of frying bacon and found a stranger in his kitchen. He had not known then that the woman standing at his stove would become the center of his world, the mother of his children, his partner in every way that mattered. He had not known that agreeing to let her stay would be the best decision of his life. But looking at her now, her face lit by the setting sun, he knew it with a certainty that ran bone deep. Winifred had not just cooked for his ranch hands that morning. She had, without knowing it, been auditioning for the role of a lifetime. And she had earned it, not through any single act but through the steady accumulation of kindness and competence and love. They rode back to the ranch as the stars began to appear, and when they walked into the house, the children came running to greet them. William wanted to show his father something in the barn. Grace had picked flowers for her mother. Catherine had a story that absolutely could not wait until morning. The house was warm and bright and full of noise and life and love. That night, after the children were finally asleep and the ranch had settled into quiet, Sarah and Winifred sat together on the porch, listening to the night sounds of the prairie. His arm was around her shoulders, and her head rested against his chest, and everything was exactly as it should be. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. "I am thinking that I am a lucky man," he said. "I am thinking that if I could go back and tell my younger self that this is what his life would become, he would not believe it. I am thinking that every hard thing I went through was worth it because it brought me here to this moment with you." She reached up and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I am thinking the same thing. Every loss, every struggle, every moment when I wanted to give up, it all led here. To you, to us, to this life we have built." They sat in comfortable silence as the night deepened around them. Inside the house their children slept safely. In the barn horses dozed in their stalls. Across the prairie cattle grazed under the stars. Everything that mattered to them was here, held safe within the boundaries of the ranch that Sarah had built and Winifred had transformed into a home. Years later, when William was ready to take over running the ranch, Sarah and Winifred built a smaller house on the property, close enough to be involved with their grandchildren but far enough to give the young family privacy. They spent their later years in comfortable retirement, watching their family grow and thrive, secure in the legacy they had built together. Sarah often thought about that morning when he had found Winifred cooking in his kitchen, and how easily he could have sent her away. How different his life would have been without her steady presence, her gentle love, her fierce determination to build something lasting. She had come to his ranch as an employee, a widow in need of work, and had become his partner in every sense of the word. And Winifred, looking back on her life, marveled at the journey that had brought her from desperation and loss to this place of belonging and love. She had walked into Sarah Logan's kitchen that morning expecting nothing more than a job, a way to survive. She had not known that the man watching her from the doorway would see past every insecurity and judgment to the woman she truly was. She had not known that cooking breakfast for a group of ranch hands would be the first step toward the greatest love of her life. On warm summer evenings, they would sit on the porch of their little house and watch the sunset paint the prairie gold, their hands clasped together, their bodies comfortable with the weight of years. Sometimes grandchildren would climb into their laps to hear stories about the old days, and they would tell carefully edited versions of how they met, leaving out the pain and fear and focusing on the love. "Grandma cooked the best breakfast Grandpa had ever tasted," Sarah would say, winking at Winifred. "And Grandpa was too stubborn to admit he had been watching me all along," Winifred would add, smiling. The children would giggle and ask to hear the story again, and they would tell it, each time adding new details or emphasizing different parts. But the core remained the same. Two people who had found each other when they needed it most, who had chosen love despite the obstacles, and who had built a life together that exceeded anything either had dared to dream. When Sarah died at the age of 78, surrounded by children and grandchildren, his last words were to Winifred. "Thank you," he whispered, his hand in hers, "for everything, for seeing me, for choosing me, for the life we built." "Thank you," she whispered back, tears streaming down her face, "for being brave enough to tell me how you felt that day in the kitchen, for not letting me leave, for loving me exactly as I was." He smiled, and then he was gone, slipping away peacefully with her hand in his. And though her heart broke with his passing, Winifred found comfort in the life they had built together, in the children and grandchildren who carried forward their legacy, in the ranch that still bore the mark of their partnership. She lived another 5 years, spending her days tending her garden, playing with great-grandchildren, and sitting on the porch looking out over the land she and Sarah had loved. When her time came, she went peacefully in her sleep, and her family buried her next to Sarah on the ridge where he had proposed, with a view of the ranch spreading out below. On their shared headstone, William had inscribed simple words: "Sarah and Winifred Logan. They built a life together. They built it well." And on the ranch below, life continued. William raised his children there, teaching them the lessons his father had taught him about hard work and integrity and the importance of choosing love. The ranch prospered through good years and bad, a testament to the solid foundation Sarah had laid and Winifred had strengthened. And every morning, when someone fired up the stove in the ranch house kitchen, the smell of coffee and bacon would drift through the rooms, and those who remembered would smile, thinking of the widow who had walked into that kitchen so many years ago and changed everything. The story of Sarah and Winifred Logan became part of the ranch's history, told and retold until it took on the quality of legend. But those who had known them understood that the real story was not dramatic or fantastical. It was simple and profound. Two people who had the courage to love despite past hurts, who built trust day by day through small acts of kindness, who created a family and a home where before there had been only loneliness. The Obese widow who had cooked for the ranch hands, not knowing the cowboy owner was watching her, had found more than employment that morning in Wheatland, Wyoming. She had found home, found purpose, found love. And the cowboy owner who had watched her work, seeing beyond the surface to the strength and beauty beneath, had found the missing piece of his life he had not known he was searching for. Their love story was not perfect or easy. There were struggles and sorrows, conflicts and compromises. But through it all ran the steady current of choosing each other, day after day, year after year, until their separate lives had become so intertwined that they were truly one. And in the end, that was what mattered. Not the judgments of others, not the obstacles they had faced, but the simple fact that they had found each other and held on tight, building something that lasted far beyond their own lifetimes. The prairie wind still whispered through the grass on the ridge where they were buried, carrying the scent of wildflowers in summer and snow in winter. The ranch still stood, solid and prosperous, a living testament to what could be built when two people worked together toward a common goal. And in the kitchen of the ranch house, generations of Logan women cooked for their families, unconsciously echoing the movements of the woman who had started it all those many years ago. Winifred Carter Logan had arrived in Wheatland broken and desperate, carrying nothing but determination and the hope for a fresh start. She had left a legacy of love, family, and belonging that touched everyone who came after. And Sarah Logan, who had given her a chance when she needed it most, had received far more in return than he had ever given, his life immeasurably enriched by her presence in it. Their story ended, as all stories must, with death and memory. But in the truest sense, it never ended at all. It lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch they had built together, in the example they had set of what love could be when given freely and received gratefully. It lived on in every couple who found each other against the odds, who chose to see past surface judgments to the heart beneath, who built something lasting through patience and commitment and daily choosing. The obese widow and the cowboy owner, the employee and the employer, the lost and the lonely. They had been all these things and more. But most importantly, they had been Sarah and Winifred, two people who had the good fortune to find each other and the wisdom to hold on tight. And in the end, that was the only story that really mattered.